Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, March 24th, 2025. I've got 7:01, so we will go ahead and get this meeting of the Committee of the Whole called to order. We will start first with items from the Department of Parks and Recreation. Good evening, Director.
Good evening.
Good evening.
If acceptable, the first three items under Parks and Recreation are related, and actually the first under engineering is also related to the same topic. So if acceptable, we like to discuss those at a broad sense, and then we can dissect if necessary.
Sounds good.
Columbia Gas of Ohio is proposing a pipeline replacement. It's a project that traverses multiple park parcels. It's approximately 19,000 feet of a 24-inch pipeline. The Columbia Gas is requesting a permanent easement through multiple park parcels in order to construct and maintain that pipeline. There are separate agreements that you'll see that are labeled through ordinance, three separate ordinances. One is for that easement, that permanent easement. The other two are an access easement in order to maintain throughout it's a perpetual access agreement. And then there's also a temporary construction easement, and that is for just the initial installation of that pipeline. The value of each of those easements are included in the supplemental documentation that you have as part of your packet. And again, helpful to the overall discussion is the following item under the engineering report. So I'll hand it over to Tom to introduce that item. And again, we'll open it up to any questions outside of that.
So in order to facilitate the pipeline work, Columbia Gas will have a regulator station proposed at the Shepherd Church just off of Cliffview. In order to get the lot split to occur, it needs to have frontage on a public right-of-way to be considered a lot and meet our zoning requirements. So the extension of Cliffview by 50 feet provides that connectivity to the parcel.
So ultimately, there are four separate ordinances in order to accomplish the easement and right-of-way access for Columbia Gas of Ohio.
Okay, thank you both. Any questions or discussion on any one of those first four items? First three under Parks and Rec, and then the first item under Department of Engineering. Yes, Mrs. McGregor.
How much of a facility will be above ground at Cliffview? Does that mean it will be a large?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Is there another one around the?
I believe there is. We can get overall siting and provide location, but as it goes through the process, I'm sure there'll be screening and associated fencing off and quarantine of the areas.
Is this the one they talked about having off Hamilton earlier?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, directors. So the map's a little hard to make out. Can you guys just help kind of elucidate where exactly this is going to be? Is it down around like Price Road and stuff? Is it jumping over the creek?
Yes, that's correct. So behind the Price Road building, and it will run alongside the existing multi-use trail. It will actually bore underneath the creek and access where the trail dead ends at Rocky Fork.
So is it
And that's where the substation will.
Sorry, is it to the north or to the south of the Price Road house?
It's to the north of the house, to the south of the building, the garage building.
Okay. So I see the values associated with it, and I guess the question that I would ask you guys is like, I mean, do you feel that that's appropriate compensation? I have some easements, some utility easements on my personal property, and I'll tell you it's a pain. It limits what you can do. So, I mean, I would defer to you all if you think that there's future improvements that you're going to do anywhere near that property, that this community is being adequately compensated for.
What we did is request evaluations of the easement in itself. We also requested a tree impact evaluation in order to be considered, and those values were included in that supplemental.
Okay. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Schnetzer. Ms. Padova?
Thank you. The, the drawing that is, let me see here, attached to ordinance 13, that one shows where the regulator station is going to be, correct?
Correct.
And you said that there should be some sort of blocking, landscaping, fencing, something back there?
Fencing, landscaping, so forth, yet to be determined. That'll have to go through a review within itself once the lot split occurs.
Okay. And I'm guessing it looks like the outline of this whole square here, I mean, that's essentially the entirety of this person's, like, backyard, essentially. So would that be like where the fencing would be, or would it be smaller than what this square shows?
So I guess to be able to see, is there a
Sorry,
way
no.
to project it up on screen?
It looks like 150 feet by 150 feet, if I'm reading this correctly. Does that sound right?
Correct, but I believe there's a 50-foot separation between that and the adjacent property.
Is this the right one?
It's vacant land, right?
Oh, you got it.
There's a better picture, that one, that's better.
Yeah. So like where that square is there on the bottom, would that be like the perimeter of where the fencing would be, or would it be a smaller section than that?
It would encompass that entire area. And then you've got the multi-use trail connectivity through there, and there's about 50 feet there from the property line to the proposed parcel.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a 50 by 50 dimensioning.
And then getting access to do this, would they be like going down Cliffview in that trail, or would they be coming from the church across?
It's indicated on this plan coming down Cliffview.
Okay. And do you know how long that the construction of this, or how long the project will last?
We're working through those details through the right-of-way permit process. 26, 27 is at the anticipated start time, but we do not know how many crews they're going to have working. To be determined at this point.
Okay. I do appreciate you guys finding a better place than, I know that there are some other spots that were considered and that they were recommending that weren't really ideal. And this is tucked back where it's kind of out of the way, more or less. I just have some concern about the residents that are right there, and especially that one driveway goes right to the end of that dead end of Cliffview. So I do just have some concerns of when they're working, if they're going to be blocked or how that would work. But I would hope that you guys would have all that figured out whenever you're working with them on making sure that everybody's able to get in and out of their driveways, and that it's not too much of a hassle for the residents right there in that immediate vicinity. Other than that, I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Yeah, I just had one question when I dug into the agreements. And there was language about this being non-recordable with the exception of meeting minutes, and that it shouldn't be recorded with Franklin County. And I was just wondering if we know why? It just seemed like that's not something I've read before, or maybe that is a standard like lawyer contracty thing. But yeah, it just specified in one of the agreements that this should not be recorded outside of this meeting, like minutes.
So, yeah, the supplemental agreement, I believe there was a desire for it to be not publicly accessible through the county auditor's website and attached to the land. So they didn't want it recorded. But obviously, it's record within council record
Yeah.
forevermore public. And it still is a public record in and of itself for public records purposes. So I think it was an effort to be similar to a non-disclosure agreement, but within the confines of what we're able to agree to.
Mr. Renner?
I'm not an attorney, but revised code 143 actually talks about infrastructure for national security purposes. And this would definitely fall in that. It's common with water and sewer. We don't want the world to really know for security purposes. And, you know, natural gas, power, these things fall under that classification as well.
I would just want to add that that is accurate. So infrastructure records that are less than 25 years old are exempt from public records. And so that includes any kind of gas, water, plumbing lines, things like that, and then any building infrastructure for public buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. City Attorney, Ms. Bowers, I saw your hand.
Yeah, just a very quick question. The amended pathway will be at the cost of Columbia Gas?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question regarding notification or communications with adjoining parcels or nearby parcels in the area, and what that will look like and who's responsible for communicating with the residents in affected properties.
Again, for this evening, the request is for the access. The Columbia Gas of Ohio does have a communications team in relation to the city's communication team. So when there are finalized details in response to what the impact is, as well as the timeline, then that will be communicated in an appropriate timeline with those residents.
Thank you. Anything else on these first four items? Okay. Seeing none, are folks okay with this coming for a first reading on the 7th and then consent on the 21st? Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Director Comlink, I'll let you pick it up where we left off.
So I have 6 additional items. There were to be 2 additional items. However, we just were not quite there with the other 2 items. So the first item is on Shaw Road, 4720 Shaw Road. The property proposes a lot split. It does not conform to the right-of-way requirements for Shaw Road being 50 feet, 25 feet from the center line. It's at 20 feet from center line. To the west, it has the 25 feet, so this is picking up the additional 5 feet as they go through their subdivision without plat.
Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, on for first on the 7th and then consent. All right, thank you. Next item, please.
Okay, the next item is to amend the sidewalk program area for the 2025 program. This will remove Moorfield and add Beaver Brook to the program. The reasoning for the removal of Moorfield, programmatically speaking, as we're looking at future improvements, there's water line work anticipated on White Swan and Embassy coming up in 2027. So as we look to structure the work in the area, we felt best to remove the work for 2025.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, it's a resolution, so on for consent on the 7th. All right, thank you. Next item, please, Director.
Okay. The next item is recommendation of award of contract to Decker Construction for the 2025 street and sidewalk maintenance program. We're also recommending the alternatives of pavement marking and the addition of resurfacing of Cherry over on the west side, just off of West Johnstown Road.
Thank you, Director. Any discussion on this item? Ms. Bowers?
Thank you very much, Director. And forgive me because I may have been able to obtain this in advance, but I didn't. Did we request any kind of employment or compensation standards for the companies in terms of benefits, minimum pay, union status, that kind of thing?
They are to follow the prevailing wage rates of Ohio.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on this? I believe I'm good on this item. So any, are folks okay with on first on the 7th and then consent on the 21st? All right, thank you. Next item, please, Director.
Okay, and the next two items are related to programmatics for 2026, setting the area for the sidewalk maintenance program related to 2026, and then the sidewalk look-back program for 2026.
All right, thank you, Director. Any discussion? So I did have one. Can you explain for me, and I feel like we've been through several iterations of the street and sidewalk programs over the last several years, and can you explain the timeline of the 2026 sidewalk program and the look-back program and when the actual work would be getting done?
That work will be getting done, will be performed in 2026 as a part of the program. So this is giving the notification to the residents that they are a part of the 26 program, affords them ample time to get a contractor on board to self-perform the work, go through any appeals process that if they want to appeal any of the sidewalk areas that they find to believe to be in compliance with ProWag. And then we move forward to the bidding process coming up in 26.
And both programs, with sidewalk and look back, are ideally following where improvements to the streets have been made.
So the 26 program is following where we're doing mill and overlay work in that given year. The look back program is looking back to 21, 22, and 23 for work that was performed during those annual programs to bring those up to the maintenance standard that we have set.
Thank you, Director. I think that's all I have. And yes, Ms. Jones.
And so you said the 2026 residents, they will be notified this year?
Correct.
Okay, and 2025 already knows?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion on these two items? Seeing none, since the resolution's on for consent on the 7th. All right. Thank you. Moving right along. I believe, if I'm doing this correctly, Director, your last item?
And the last item, yes. We are working with the Ohio Department of Transportation on a participation of the reconstruction of the Wind Ridge Bridge. That is set to go out for bidding and award coming up here in April. And the earliest construction could commence would be about July of this year. We will not know more until contractors on board and schedules are produced.
All right. Any discussion on this item? Yes, Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director. You anticipate any access disruption as part of that replacement? I think there's like 5 or 6
Access is to be maintained to the residents. They're going to be doing part with construction.
Thank you so much.
Anything else on this item? All right, seeing none, on for consent on the 7th? All right, thank you very much, Director.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have items from council members. I think distributed among the dais is an Earth Month resolution, and for this, I will turn things over to Ms. Bowers.
Thank you, Chair Weaver. So as we've done in years prior, we're bringing forward a proposed resolution recognizing Earth Month for April 2025, which also recognizes April 22nd as Earth Day. Unlike years past, I have added Air Quality Awareness Week to this resolution. Originally my thought was that because Air Quality Awareness Week has historically fallen at the end of April, it would make sense to include them together. I discovered that the EPA actually recognizes Air Quality Awareness Week this year, May 5 through 9, but close enough, I think, for this purpose, for us to continue the recognition in one resolution by recognizing April 2025 as Earth Month and May 5 through 9 as Air Quality Awareness Week. I wanted to extend my thanks to Jessica Hiltz and Jeremy for their initial draft on this document. And I apologize for the lateness in circulating it to council members, and I look forward to your comments.
All right, thank you, Ms. Bauer. Any discussion on this item? Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As was previously mentioned, I think we've had this for maybe 20 minutes or so. Just wanted to suggest that maybe the title be altered slightly from "To a Greener Gahanna" to a sustainable or more sustainable Gahanna. As I read through some of the text, there's a lot of talk about efficiency and so forth, and I think perhaps sustainability is the more appropriate terminology there. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Schnetzer.
No problem. I think I was going back and forth myself as to what the title should be, and
The alliteration, the double G, I get it.
I got pulled with yeah. Yes, and also a little shout out to Make Gahanna Yours, because they of course have a litter cleanup, and they always refer to it as a cleaner, greener Gahanna, I think. So that's why I had originally included greener Gahanna in the title.
Understood.
Any other discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, a resolution, are we okay with consent on the 7th for this item? All right, thank you all very much. Turning to items from Ms. Bowers, I know there was a request to add a quick item of discussion surrounding Senate Bill 63, and for that I'll turn to Ms. Bowers as well.
Yeah, thank you again, Chair Weaver. I just wanted to bring up to my colleagues' attention, since we had just spoken about a prior Senate bill that sought to preempt local control and home rule. There's another one. This is another scenario where there had been previous legislation pending. It did not survive the 135th General Assembly, but it has been brought back in the 136th General Assembly. This time it is Senate Bill 63, which seeks to prohibit and restrict local governments from determining their own form of elections. This bill specifically seeks to ban ranked choice voting, which would basically restrict local governments to engaging in kind of a two-party or totally nonpartisan system. I think that, you know, we have our own way of electing local officials here in Gahanna with a nonpartisan approach. And my concern about this piece of legislation is that it again infringes on home rule and our abilities to make decisions that are in the best interests of our own communities. Opponent testimony on Senate Bill 63 is scheduled for tomorrow. There is also a open letter circulating that people can sign, an open letter from local elected officials to protect home rule in Ohio in opposition to Senate Bill 63. And I will circulate that, so if people want to individually sign on to that, they're welcome to. I'll also circulate information regarding ranked choice voting. I don't take a position necessarily on ranked choice voting, and I don't think it's necessary for this purpose. But again, I think it is important that we continue to stand firm against preemption and in support of home rule.
Thank
Okay.
you, Ms. Bowers. Appreciate it. Any comments on that before we? All right. Thank you. Rest of Section D is under you, President Bowers.
Okay. We had discussed at our last discussion, at the last time that this was brought to you, that it was requested that we get additional information on total financial impact. And so I have brought forward this continued discussion of elected official salaries for consideration this evening. And I want to preface the conversation by saying that this is another opportunity to share information, not necessarily to put anyone on the spot or to force any kind of decisions at this point. But if there are additional questions, we can take those questions into consideration and solicit additional information. So if you click on the 2025-0045, the legislation file that Mr. Van Meter has created, Mr. Van Meter has added to that item number 8, the financial attachment proposed increase impact. And thank you to Director Burry for providing that information. So what this indicates is the total financial impact based on the additional cost of benefits that would come along with the proposed increases. So just to summarize for people who might be watching, by position, I think the by position breakdown is super helpful. The mayor's salary at its current it's currently salaried at $103,809. The number that I have suggested would be appropriate at $130,000 for an annual salary effective 2028. That would have a total financial impact of $30,829 annually, and that would include a $3,666 increase in OPER's cost, and then a less than $1,000 increase combined for Medicare and workers' comp and life insurance. The city attorney's salary is currently at $80,765 annually. I have suggested that $110,000 annual salary would be an appropriate salary based on the information provided at our last meeting. The impact to the total additional cost would be $34,411 annually. And that's due to about $5,000 impact in benefits and the $29,000 impact in increased salary. And then finally, for all council members, current salary per council member is $9,600. The proposed increase would raise that to $12,750 per year, with a total increase, including some additional cost in OPERS, Medicare, and workers' comp benefits, for a total annual cost across all council members, 7 council members, of $7,400 per year. So yeah, total overall impact to the budget, if all increases were passed effective 2020, for per year, would be $72,643.
Thank you, President Bowers. I know I had also, or one of the comments that were made several weeks ago now, was related to the timing of the effectiveness of the ordinances. And I know the city attorney's office, along with this assistant city attorney Roth, had also taken a look at that in terms of possibly starting if the ordinance were to be approved, starting all of council on the same date, even though the ward seats would potentially start in the middle of a term. City attorney, did you have anything you wanted to clarify?
Yes, thank you. I believe, as Mr. Roth indicated before, that the salaries are to be set term by term. But our interpretation of that is that the effective date can be midterm if necessary, or a staggered start date, in other words, and that would be acceptable under charter. It's just that it needs to be determined prior to the start of the term and prior to petitions being filed, and must stay the same and not be modified during the term by that sitting elected official. So I don't think there's anything inappropriate or inconsistent with charter to do either the proposed start dates to start for the full term and be set for the full term, or to start all council seats, for example, on the same 2028 date. And so therefore, it would take effect midway through the ward seats and then a full term for the at-large seats. I think either way would be acceptable under charter.
Thank you, City Attorney. Any questions, comments from my colleagues?
They-
Mrs. McGregor?
They've done that before with the other salaries, like the mayor's salary at one time was 1 year, and it increased the next year, and increased the next year. So each year had a different amount. So that's not, that would not be the first time it's ever been done.
Thank you for that.
But we wouldn't be saying, like, if we were to do that, that it wouldn't be an incremental increase year over year, are we? Or are we just saying it stays as is till whatever the effective start date? Or is-
That's my understanding of the proposal, is that everybody would start on the same date at whatever newly appointed salary.
Okay.
And probably the ordinance would say for like, what is it, 2020, what's this, 25, 26, it'd be, or 26, 27 would be one amount, and 20, but the next 2 years would be a different amount.
Correct.
Yeah, so.
Okay, I have questions on other things not related to that, if we're,
Mr. Renner, or Ms. Jones, you're welcome
oh,
to
okay.
continue.
I'm sorry, so
I just saw the fingers pointing down there.
No, I want to understand a little bit more about OPERS. So I know, Joanne, you sent some information and had a conversation with Miranda as well. I guess I want to understand the service credit piece and how that changes for council if we increase. I understand 1,000 is sort of that threshold for healthcare, but then where does the service credit thing come in, and how does that change?
So the service credit, you're fine at the current level. Now, that minimum earnable salary that you need to make each year in order to earn a full year service credit does change. But currently, your current rates are within that amount. And I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what that amount is, but I can get back to all of you with that, what the 2025 amount is. But you're all well within that to earn a full year of service credit.
Now, and at the increase.
And at the increase too. What the increase does is make sure that you're meeting that threshold just for the insurance eligibility, which, as we all know, is not a guaranteed benefit that they will continue to provide.
But if I could just clarify, I think the way I understand it is that we, at our current salary at $9,600 a year, we qualify for service credit into pension eligibility, but we don't qualify for service credit in order to purchase health insurance.
Well, you wouldn't be eligible for the HRA
Right.
program. So that's basically the only benefit that they're providing. You're always eligible to purchase your own insurance, and anything that you would purchase through OPERS at this point would be fully the member's responsibility. They only provide that HRA as a supplement to help you pay for the insurance that you have to cover on your own expense. And they do have a portal that you wouldn't have access to, similar to what the federal government provides. They have a portal of their own where you could shop, where they've worked with certain providers to provide rates for their members.
I know Mr. Schnetzer had a follow-up to this.
Well, just to add, I'll save you the homework of having to go and look it up. So on the OPERS website, and this is referring to the pension credit, not the healthcare credit. For 2025, the earnable salary must be more than $734.07 per month. Obviously, everybody up here is at least 800, and that increases, it looks like, at a rate of 1.75% per year. So by the time you get to calendar year 2029, that would go up to about $786.82. So still below the $800 level that everybody else is up here. But again, to your point, the healthcare credit is higher. I think it's, what you say, is $1,000 a month or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And reiterating that it's it's HRA, like that's the only benefit.
Correct.
And that's the health reimbursement account, which is different than a health savings account. So a health reimbursement account is OPERS putting the money in, but it's their money. In reverse, like what we do here is we have health savings accounts for employees. Once the city deposits the money into my health savings account, it is now my personal money. Health reimbursement account is not that. It's a reimbursement account. You would go out on the exchange, buy your health insurance, or get a prescription filled, whatever, and you submit the receipt, and then the money comes. You have to like keep the receipts for tax purposes, whereas a savings account is the individual's money. A health reimbursement account is not the individual's money.
And can you indicate, is the HRA like an HSA where I can put my amount, like I want this certain amount?
To my knowledge, you cannot make your own contributions
That's
to an HRA. Only the pension system or an employer can make contributions to an HRA.
Can I ask a clarifying
Ms. Bowers.
question, and maybe just, so I'm on the opers.org/members/pension-HC-eligibility page, and that's linked in the memo. And it says on the website, the minimum monthly earnable salary required to earn service credit for healthcare coverage is $1,000, which is more than the requirement for pensions, $684.86. And when I called OPERS to verify my understanding of this, they affirmed that this is eligibility for any health insurance at all in retirement through an OPERS system. So
So OPERS they no longer provide a health insurance plan for all OPERS members. OPERS members that have access can go into the portal that Joanne talked about, similar to the healthcare on the federal website, and you purchase it. OPERS is not paying for it. They might have negotiated a discount for OPERS members, but then whatever the amount is, let's just say it's $2,000 or it's $800 a month that they're giving that to you in a health reimbursement account. So if your monthly premium with the insurance you bought out on the exchange is $1,200, the money you're getting is not covering the full amount. It is likely to never cover the full amount of what your health insurance actually is going to cost.
So I thought OP&F went to that system, but I didn't, correct, right? But I did not think OPERS had gone to that system yet.
They did shortly after OP&F. Unfortunately, and that's something, if you look on their website all over the place, they are very adamant at mentioning that there is no requirement by law that they provide any type of health care. And they've slowly been dwindling it down to now it's just an HRA. And probably by the time I retire, which actually isn't that far off, there probably won't be an HRA for me to even.
Not allowed. Not allowed.
So the HRA, just to be eligible for the HRA, though, it's still that $1,000 number.
Correct.
So you still have to earn $1,000 to be eligible to participate in the HRA program?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I will say, I think it makes sense, whatever the path folks choose. If this were to move forward, I think it makes sense for all the salaries to start on the same day. So I do appreciate that additional clarification from the city attorney's office, or I shouldn't say on the same day, but at the start of the same year. And I think that would be appropriate. Also say I was surprised by the mayor's comments on this topic several weeks ago, as those comments were in direct contrast to statements that were made during our monthly leadership meeting several months ago when this topic was first brought up. So while I do understand that we all knew the salaries when we first decided to run, I'm happy to debate all of these issues. I'm focused on planning for the future, and not for, obviously, charter prohibits us from doing this for ourselves. So I'll just say that.
Excuse me, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah,
I
Madam Mayor.
don't believe that I have ever expressed support for increasing the mayor's salary. I have not ever done that.
Respectfully disagree, Madam
Well,
Mayor.
I
That is-
respectfully remain adamant around what my own comments have been. I have been consistent. I appreciate the interest in the mayor's salary. I am the mayor, and I believe I'm best positioned to speak to the fairness of the salary that I receive. We previously went to voters for issue 12 in May of 2019 because we had a backlog of projects that we could not keep up with and maintenance of facilities and other things that we could not keep up with. I bring issue 12 up not because it deals with funding elected salaries, but because it speaks to just how far we were behind other municipalities in all regards, not only with regard to our capital projects, but also with regard to our human capital, investing with our people. We were losing people right and left in 2019 because they were underpaid and overworked. And we have made great strides, and I commend council over the past several years for helping to make investments in that staff so that we can keep and retain the best and the brightest to work here, but we are not where we need to be. It is not the right time for this. Down the road, maybe, but it is not the right time. And I remain adamantly opposed to that right now. And I believe I have been.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, Mr. Schnetzer.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So I don't know if we're taking these in order, if it's just kind of a mishmash.
I think any of them are fair game, so.
Okay, so the city attorneys, the data behind the city attorney is the one I suppose that I struggle with the most, just because it's the thinnest. I think there's, and I'm looking at, if you guys are on your agenda, this is the memo. And if you click on memo, it's the third one on the list where we have, I believe there are 3 tables for, one for council, one for the mayor, and one for the city attorney. And thank you, I suppose, council office, or maybe one of my colleagues up here put this together. Thank you for the information. But, so we have information about full-time, part-time, and then we have salary. The one thing, I guess, that would be nice to also know is to what extent these other structures, these other cities, other governments, permit the city attorney to maintain an outside law practice. I think that that probably needs to be considered within the overall package description. So if there's a way to maybe obtain that information, that might benefit future discussion, conversation.
I can share with you that the communities that hire law directors, I don't believe that they are permitted to prohibit outside work.
Okay. So on this list, are you able to quickly, is there something that says where they're hired versus elected?
This, and you're right to point out that this was probably the most difficult comparison.
Yeah.
I can tell you, let's see here, if I go back to that chart.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
It looks like item 4, or attachment 4, the OML City Salary Survey 23. Looks like column Y, Z might break that down. It doesn't have it for every community, but it looks like it has a breakdown for some,
Yes.
for full-time, part-time.
Salary survey.
OML
Law
City
Director.
Salary Survey 23.
All right. I don't need to tie up the discussion. I'll do a little bit
I
more homework.
think it's a valid question.
Mr. Weaver?
Yes, Madam City
Okay.
Attorney.
The International Municipal Lawyers Association, the IMLA, did a full and comprehensive survey of all city attorneys that are participating in that organization. It's a very bulky document that I'm trying to digest in a more readable format, or at least extract the information that's pertinent to our discussion. But I can send you the full I can circulate the full document, and then I can circulate a summary of that to give you a better idea of that. But just as a point of reference, the assistant city attorney is a full-time salaried employee at a certain pay grade, and he is not precluded from maintaining additional work as long as it does not interfere with his duties to the city of Gahanna. So, for example, he prosecutes for other municipalities. He served in the past as a magistrate for another community. All of these things did not interfere or impact or conflict with his duties to the city of Gahanna. So even his salary was also taking into account the fact that he is not prohibited from additional part-time employment.
Sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, like I said, it's a hard one to categorize or to find a match. I mean, even here in the city of Gahanna, we've gone from, part-time with no benefits to being able to maintain a practice to now full-time with benefits and continuing to maintain benefits. Continuing to maintain a practice. I mean, and that pay has increased, at least in the tenure that I've been here as well. So, I mean, we want to get it right, but at the same time, I think, more information is probably needed since that one, the direct comps are so kind of all over the place. So, yeah, I look forward to anything that you might be able to pass along. It'd be great. Thank you.
Director Vollmer, did you have something you wished?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the assistant city attorney is covered under the salary ordinance and the benefits ordinances in our city policies. Those policies require that if you're doing outside work not for the city of Gahanna, you have to be on leave. Because if you're doing work for, it doesn't matter who, and you're getting paid from them, you can't also be getting paid from us. That's an ethics problem. So we have other employees who are fiscal officers at other townships, who do other employment, who might train for like the Red Cross, and when they're doing those jobs, they have to be on a paid leave that they've accrued because they cannot be receiving compensation because you're getting, right? Like if you're at the Red Cross, working for the Red Cross, you can't also be working in Gahanna in the same hour. So I just wanted to clarify that employees should not be doing that. And if you're receiving compensation from the city of Gahanna, you should be doing city of Gahanna work only. Or something related, such as like I'm on a board representing the city of Gahanna, so therefore when I do that board work, that's city work. But if you're doing work for a different jurisdiction, for the Red Cross, for McDonald's, you can't also be on city time. You have to be on accrued paid leave.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Director. Did you have anything else? I mean, I guess, sounds like there's a couple requests for additional information. What should we say? Is there a desire for this to come back to committee, maybe? And I mean, I know we have a fifth Monday, so should we say the 14th? Is that adequate time?
There's, that, I think committee agenda is going to be pretty full, so maybe the 28th
Okay.
might be preferable.
Back for committee on the 28th for these three items.
And what's coming back? What you requested?
So there was a clarification on city attorney. I think my preference would be to keep the three items together at this point.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Clerk, did you get that?
Yep.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, next we have an update on the community grants program. Good evening, Director Weibensinger. And welcome back, Director Burry.
Good evening. It's the first time I've been able to do that without Director Schultz having to do it over my shoulder, so fantastic.
He hasn't gone far.
All right, so as part of our 2025 update strategy, what we wanted to do is bring forward an update of our community grant program. We did talk about it in the budget as well. with the community grant program, talking about local revenue sources. That's why Director Burry is here with me, as well as that'll be kind of the end part of the presentation. What I wanted to do is kind of do a program overview, kind of talk about the 23 and 24 program that we had in place, and then transition into the 25 strategy as well. Over the past 2 years, the 23 and 24 program, we invested $150,000 into local nonprofits. That was funded through through ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act. In 23, we awarded $50,000 through 9 awards through 10 applicants. And then in 24, we had $100,000 awarded to 15 nonprofits through 20 applications. The purpose of the program is to assist nonprofit organizations with projects and programs that provide community-wide benefit. With the 25 program transitioning from federal dollars through the American Rescue Act to local funds, there is going to be a shift in some of the requirements for the program, as we want to make sure we enhance our oversight to reduce any potential risk or liability on the city's behalf. The evaluation process, we are currently maintaining multiple priorities. Priorities are going to be consistent with the level 1s as they were the last 2 years. 1A would be our basic human necessities, which we would include to be food and clothing insecurities. And 1B were mental health services with social health issues. We have an additional carve-out that we're doing to kind of enhance based on what we've learned over the last couple years throughout the program. And a Tier 2 category would be general safety, health, and welfare, which could include assistance with transportation, housing, and utilities, other basic necessities for our residents. And then 3 would be the general improvement of the Gahanna community. Previously, that was a Tier 2. It becomes a Tier 3. With the changes, our grant review committee is looking a little bit different, restructured. We are going to go from a 5-person committee to a 3-person committee to a 5-person committee. That would mean 2 of the mayor's appointees, 2 of council's appointees, which we've already got that information from Clerk Van Meter, and again, 1 city staff member. DAS does oversee the program. We are facilitators. We are not involved in any of the recommendations that are made. We just facilitate that program. The Grant Review Committee will evaluate all the applications based on our priorities and the guidelines and requirements. I'll kind of dive into the guidelines and requirements as we go through the next couple slides here. As we did with the last 2 programs, we do issue notices of awards and non-awards to all of the applicants. With that, we do offer, if anybody needs assistance in understanding why they didn't get an award, we try to put it in the letter, but we always do offer assistance to help them better understand where they may have fallen short. And then the Grant Review Committee would approve up to a not to exceed amount of what the program year budget would be. In 2025, that budget is $100,000. So some of the important guidelines and rules for the program, very similar eligibility requirements from last time. Financial disclosures is a must as well. Registered IRS nonprofit based in Gahanna, and an organization must directly serve the Gahanna community. In our application, we better define the Gahanna community to meaning the city of Gahanna or the Gahanna-Jefferson School District as well as we consider our community. A minimum of 51% of the beneficiaries of the program must be contained within that community. We kind of defined that a little bit better before. It was the priority or primary focus would be the community. We want to make sure that we are establishing over 50% of those program beneficiaries would be within our community. Maximum of 10% can be used towards administrative costs. Again, we're trying to fund programs and not necessarily the nonprofits themselves. And this is going to be transitioning to a reimbursement basis. We previously had done advance payments with some of these programs. As we're transitioning to local dollars, the risk and liability drops drastically if we do a true reimbursement basis. We have the ability, upon an approved request for reimbursement, Payments will be processed back to the nonprofits within 30 days. Realistically, it's going to be much less than that, as we do check runs every week. But we want to make sure we give ourselves some grace over holidays and things like that. The not to award cap we did put in place of not to exceed $10,000 per application. We believe this allows us to diversify and include more nonprofits. We have found over the last couple of years the average award is around a $5,000 or $6,000 range, our lowest being $850. So with the cap, this kind of ties it in and allows potential equity amongst more of our Gahanna nonprofits. We do have some mandatory steps in place now for programmatic reporting. I'll show you the timeline we have at the end to make sure that we are actively involved in the projects and programs as we get into the 25 program. And again, no match funds are required for these grants. A couple of new reporting requirements that we're rolling out. And working with some of the nonprofits the first few years, we allowed them to do a lot of the reporting that they best saw fit, as long as we got what we felt we needed to ensure that the program was going forward and what was allocated for the awards. Some of the pushback was that was kind of a broad ask for some of the nonprofits. So what we have created are going to be more streamlined city forms for progress updates to ensure we are getting what we need and streamlining their request to us to make sure that they're not building more than what we need to ensure compliance. Upon awards, they will agree to a minimum of one session with a DAS staff member to ensure that we're all on the same page when it comes to the program and project. Some of depending on what we receive back, might require more than one sit down with us to ensure compliance with the program. And then the city is also going to be providing grant closeout documents and the reimbursement request form. So everything is going to be a lot more standardized now that we're transitioning into a reimbursement-based program. Administrative monitoring, this is where the Department of Administrative Services will continue to do all of the grant monitoring. Again, over the previous years, we had 9 awards in 23, 15 and 24. We are still working through that process as well. We have a couple from 23, which are some longer term projects. A lot of those are in the mental health space that we are continuing to work through. 24, we've got about half of those are what we would consider closed out. Some of them are longer projects, especially those that deal with food instability. We did a lot of access for differently abled individuals to be able to help grow in some of our local gardens, some of our nonprofit gardens. With that, the seasonal planting is now coming, so we're going to be able to really realize some of those gains as the weather gets better, and we're starting to see some of that. Some of those fruits, vegetables, and those be grown, which then correlate back to the Grand Food Pantry and some of our nonprofits working together. And then we do have the plan, like we did with 23 and 24, upon the notifications of awards, to come before council, make sure that we update you on the award amounts and the award projects. And then as the 25 program moves forward, to bring back any significant progress or particular projects that we want to make sure come before you. Anticipated timeline, this is assuming that we can hit the go-live date of April 1st, which is only a week away. We want to give the nonprofits a minimum of 2 weeks. We're aiming for around 24 days, actually, to give them enough time to be able to pull any documentation they need together to ensure that we are getting as many applications as possible. The submission will be through our OpenGov platform like we have done previously, so there will be electronic submission options along with paper options, and they can email in their applications, they can drop them off at the front desk. Everything that we've done over the last 2 years remains as well. We do have, with the anticipated notification date, around June 2nd for the awards. And then we would start our monitoring process and our touch bases and mandatory reporting all the way through December. The goal is to have programs and projects finalized by December 31st if programs and projects are not going to be finalized by the calendar year, they can request an extension of that timeline, which we would review to ensure that that it makes sense for the funding source. What we want to not continue to do is monitor community grant programs that last 1, 2, 3 years out. It becomes quite an administrative burden to stay on top of all of those programs.
So just going back to budget time when we were talking about this program and identifying some resources. So just as a general, all general fund resources have been used or earmarked for various purposes. So this is not new revenue I'm identifying. Things that were previously funded by the revenue I'm going to identify would now have to be funded in some other manner. So this is not new revenue, it's existing revenue that we have. There are also some non-tax resources that were not considered. And those are resources that are supporting various activities because of policy or Ohio Revised Code or the ordinances of the city. And there are also some things that we collect on behalf of other entities. There are certain fees, permits that we collect on behalf of the county or the city of Columbus or what have you, or the state. Those are collected and then passed through. So kind of stripping all of that away. Those resources that are meant to fund other things either through policy or code. So that leaves possible 3 sources that could potentially be earmarked for this purpose. The first one is liquor permits collected by a council office. Those are ideally to offset the administrative aspects of those liquor permits, but nothing in code or policy that says that that's what it's to be used for. So that's roughly $40,000 a year. The other is interest revenue. This fluctuates from year to year. It's estimated to be $5 million in 2025, but keep in mind that's probably going to split in half, if not more, once the economy stabilizes and rates are back to normalization. So it has been a large number, but it is going to go down to about half or a third of what it is.
Are you
probably in the
holding
near
your breath
future.
about the economy stabilizing in the next 3
Yes.
years? Okay.
Yeah, so just, it's been nice on the investment side, not so good on the borrowing side, but on the investment side, we have seen this kind of create some additional resources for us that aren't going to be there in the future. So this has potentially been, and in the past has been earmarked for those transfers that we make for debt service payments or for the severance payouts that occur. So those are roughly about $500,000 each year. So thinking about that revenue, even with those transfers going out, that could be something that could support this program. There's also local government funding that comes in at about $1 million per year. That is for any governmental purpose and could be these grants also. That has been earmarked across all programs and activities throughout the years, right? That's what it's meant to be used for. The possible fourth is the lodging tax that we had talked about. This also fluctuates, and our 1% that the city brings in is estimated to be about $67,000 in 2025. However, I say possible because I don't necessarily think that the way that the ordinance is currently worded that we could use it for this particular purpose. So the way that the ordinance is spelled out, that these resources shall be used for special events, promotion or development, project or expenditures which enhance the city's appeal to visitors and tourists, promotes and publicizes the city to attract visitors and tourists. So I think if this were to be identified as the possible resource for funding this, we'd probably have to tweak that ordinance to add that it's beyond just tourism and visitation and special events, that we're also including potential grant programs within that funding resource.
Or community welfare.
Something along those lines. And then just general considerations, to just go back to where these kind of started. It started with one-time resources. It was never anticipated that this would be a service that we would continue once those one-time resources were gone. So thinking about as we move through the years, if we are going to expand and say this is now a new service that we're providing, making sure that we keep in mind how we're prioritizing that against the other basic services of the city. And that maybe this should only be considered if we have a situation where general fund revenues are above appropriations for the year. And we're still kind of earmarking those one-time resources, saying that we're not using all of our revenue. We have some remaining. The community grant program should continue. So just some general considerations to think about if we are going to consider this an expanded service of the city.
All right, any questions for either one of us?
Well, thank you both for the presentation and for the follow-up. I greatly appreciate it. I will turn things over to Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. First off, thank you both for the presentation. It clearly seems like there's been a lot of effort, and a lot of thought and consideration gone into kind of like revising and I guess in layman's terms, kind of tightening up the program parameters. So, and I think that's going to give everybody, not just in the room, but in the community, you know, a greater level of comfort. But I think it was uttered twice, maybe three times, the phrase risk or liability. Can you just define, I think there's a handful of us up here that have probably had a career's worth of fill on risk and liability. What are we referring to there?
Yeah, so again, advanced payments are options, and that's what we've utilized first 2 years of the program, where you basically tell us what program you want to run, we advance the money, and then we monitor for compliance, right? Essentially, that's like you know, giving a contractor working on your house money before the job is done to make sure it's doing it. With that, you do inherit any risk or liability that they're going to not perform once they receive the funding.
Okay.
So flipping that to reduce the risk or the liability of a situation like that occurring with local dollars is we vet the reimbursement request, so we are not giving any dollars until we vet that it is an appropriate expense against the approved application.
Okay, so when you say risk and liability, well, maybe it's more the liability thing is where my mind is going, but so the risk is that if, you know, if there's a paper trail or there's a receipt that they've already incurred the expense and it's simply on a reimbursement basis, we're lowering the risk that, I mean, for, again, just plain language, that the program's being defrauded, right? But is there any liability to the city? And that's a primary function of this council up here is, you know, we're to minimize liability where we can. So I just want to make sure, you know, it's abundantly.
Right, so the funding would be allocated for the program. The application would be, the award is based upon agreeing to the terms and conditions that is agreed upon within the application. So the liability would be if we agree upon the terms and conditions of the application and they adhere to it, and then at some point we decide not to reimburse, there could be a potential liability at that point.
Okay. Another phrase, social health. I had to Google it. I'm just curious, within the realms of the program, how are you guys going to define social health?
So let me go back a couple slides here. So a lot of it, let me go back here real quick. I think I'm moving. So throughout the first couple of iterations we've had, mental health and mental health counseling services have been, I would say, clearly defined in the applications that are coming to us. There could be some broad spectrum beyond that the review committee determines to also be of a social health and welfare statute. We do a lot of like mentorship in that space, which also could lead back to the mental health services as well. Okay. But I think some of it is, it depends on what applications come in and what's being proposed and whether or not we would consider, or the committee would consider that to be a category of mental health or other type of social health services.
Like resume writing, job interview preparation?
Could be as well, as again, workforce readiness could be a determinant.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just a couple more.
Please.
So I guess pivoting to Joanne, I don't intend this to be second guessing your efforts. I just want to make sure, you know, that we turned over every stone on the item of the non-tax revenue sources. I believe the Westerville program was in part the inspiration for the current program. And in my review of what they do up there is one of their primary revenue sources are right-of-way fees. Is that something that we had looked at?
So right-of-way fees are intended to support the engineering cost of administering that, and I would say no, not based on our current language and our ordinances and what that is intended to finance.
And if I could chime in real quick, Worthington is really the basis of our program. They have their community grant program, and theirs is funded through their local government or local general fund revenue. It used to be the offset to lodging tax. Their main hotel went out of business, and as I talked with their finance director, the council felt that it was a program that was worth keeping, even though the lodging tax wasn't supporting it, and so they've kept it in, and it is unassigned to a particular funding stream.
Okay. Joanne, cell phone tower fees, don't we get some, I think some of the one by the golf course and the one by Big Walnut Trail south of Academy Park, we received some continual funding there too, don't we?
Correct, and we looked at that as that's going into public service as a mechanism to fund the administration and management of those very complex contracts. I don't know if you've ever seen those contracts, but they are fairly large and they go on for a lot of years. So again, I stayed away from anything that I deemed as intended to fully or partially or mostly finance that department's efforts to administer those items.
Thank you. That's all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schnetzer. Ms. Bowers.
I want to echo Mr. Schnetzer's compliments, and thank you so much for bringing this back to us and for the work that you've put in to building out this program, making it more accountable, more sustainable, and then also for some of the finance discussion as well. Kind of, I think, maybe foreshadowing into the year-end 2024 report. I also was planning on complimenting Mr. Schnetzer because I know that he has been instrumental in helping to support our investment policy. And I noticed that our investment revenue surpassed projections for 2024. And so I also noticed in your slide, Director Burry, that you identified interest revenue as a potential source for funding this program. And it would make sense to me that in years where we are doing well, that this program would be a way to share that ability for us to invest resources and to make interest off of those resources. And so perhaps that, to me, seems to make sense, and I would love to get especially Mr. Schnetzer's thoughts on that, but of course the rest of my colleagues.
I would agree. I mean, we had a very robust debate in December about trying to identify non-tax revenue sources, and, you know, I'm not going to revisit it in depth here, but I think, you know, for me, at least, it's important. And if, you know, the administration concurs, and I would support moving forward with that.
So in terms of next steps with regard to that, I see some heads nodding up here as well in agreement. Would that require a supplemental appropriation to redirect?
No, it's just identifying and saying that for this particular program, we earmarked interest revenue as the funding mechanism for it.
And that interest revenue is already into the general fund?
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Mrs. McGregor.
Would there only be one reimbursement, or could they, if it was like, I mean, would they, if it was an ongoing program, could they periodically request reimbursement?
Yeah, so the goal is to have one reimbursement at the end of the program when we do our closeout packet. It falls in line with a lot of the programs that we apply for funding as well, is once you've met all the criteria, all the reporting requirements, then you submit everything as a reimbursement, and then it comes back in one swoop. And again, what we want to make sure we're looking at as well is the administrative burden. You know, if we happen to get 20 awardees again, it gets to a very hard to manage program if we're allowing reimbursements, let's just say weekly or even monthly at some point. But if we know we do the complete closeout in the request, and then within, we'll say 30 days, but probably within 10 to 30 days, you're going to get your reimbursement. A lot of that seems to be manageable for a lot of the nonprofits that we continue to work with.
Thank you. And then I think it's a good idea, and maybe in the application, stress that this is expected to last, to be within 2025, I mean, to be expended, you know, so
Correct,
it does, so that it doesn't go on, like on and
Yeah,
on.
and that'll be part of the timeline that I mentioned there as well. That will be relayed to the applicants to understand the reporting requirements as well.
If I could, Corey, when you laid out the timeline for that, so application opening April 1, application close April 25th, you're not anticipating any further portals opening after that, that all funds would be dispersed or at least awarded after that first tranche?
Correct.
Okay, so to your point then, any request would have to be issued within that first application time period. So if I'm understanding what you're asking, if there are maybe multiple bites of the apple, or we submitted this request, now we want to submit this request, is that what you're asking?
For this last question?
Yes.
No, because well, what he said was some of them are still ongoing from the previous years.
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure,
Oh, okay,
we
I
stress
gotcha.
that they
Yeah.
have to be
You're talking
done
about
within 2025.
As I stated before, the goal is the December 31st to 25 close date.
Right.
But certain circumstances, they could request an extension
Sure.
of time depending on certain things. So a lot of times, the programs might be weather dependent as well. And them doing it in December versus January, we can work with them on that. What we don't want to do is have 20 different agreements going over multiple years with multiple
Sure.
reimbursement requests. It's going to get to a point that's unmanageable or not a
I
good
agree, that's
use
right.
of our time.
Thank you, Director. I saw Ms. Bowers had a follow-up and then several other hands up here, so Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think I got a little confused. So you are now suggesting that this is a reimbursement-only program?
Correct, yes. Yep.
For organizations that are perhaps seeking matching dollars or from another source, would that potentially have a negative effect on them being able to secure that matching dollars if this is a reimbursement-only program? Or do you think that the award letter will be sufficient to assist them with seeking matching dollars?
I think it depends on what they're applying for and what they're trying to match. It could be challenging using matching dollars on something that you haven't received yet.
Right.
It would be a challenge. But yes, this goes back to Mr. Schnetzer's, risk versus liability. By doing any type of an advance payment, we can work with them if potentially in their application, they would like a letter of award, which we provide anyways, that indicates that this is awarded to be utilized as match funds if they receive that. If they don't receive that fund, then that fund would go back to our general fund to be used at a future date.
We also have the purchase orders. So once somebody is awarded, we open up a purchase order that's basically saying these funds have been legally encumbered
Yeah.
for your purpose. So I would think that that would satisfy any organization that was offering matching funds.
I'll just say from my perspective that by dropping the max award to $10,000 and by creating this more robust review committee and a tighter timeline with tighter forms, for me, you have satisfied my concerns about risk, especially since we're awarding essentially to a lot of known entities here in our own community. I do not feel that a reimbursement program is necessary since we've capped the dollar amount at a relatively low number with the other accounting mechanisms, accountability mechanisms that are in place. And I'll just express my hope that this doesn't impact small organizations from being able to utilize these resources. And I hope that we can continue to look at that going forward.
Sure.
Thank you. I saw Ms. Jones and Ms. Padova.
Yeah, I mean, my question was going to be just that, is for smaller nonprofits who might not, like, they want 10,000 and that's what they're applying for, but they might not have that in the bank to pay that ahead to be reimbursed. If there's anything in that application process that would open them to still, for the consideration, like, is it proving that I don't have 10,000 in the bank account to pay this ahead and be reimbursed? Like, would there be any flexibility on that?
Any change from where we have it would be increased liability, and I keep using the term, but liability and risk to the city of any type of defaults on the program being rolled out as agreed upon. Part of our structure as well is we do get a financial review of all the applicants to ensure there is financial stability. What we don't want is to fund somebody for a project and then they disappear.
Sure, of course.
And so financial
yeah.
stability is valuable in our process as well.
And I would also like to say that the majority of grant programs out there do run on a reimbursement basis now. And the idea is not that we are to be supplanting their fundraising programs, we're to be supplementing it. So they still have their fundraising opportunities to raise the revenue that they need in order to perform and then come to us for reimbursement.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Ms. Padova.
Thank you. With the applications and recipients that you've seen over in the past programs, do you think that the reimbursement aspect of this would be limiting any of this, or from what you've seen so far, do you think it would be kind of a non-issue for the people that recipients that we've awarded in the past?
The programs that we've awarded that have been compliant with the priorities and the guidelines and requirements, I do not believe that this is going to be a major hindrance upon that. It may be a change in potential funding models for some organizations. Some of them, during their application, may provide a letter of support from another organization saying, this organization will offset the cost if we get this, and therefore it's an entirely whole program as well. We have seen that as well. But again, a lot of the times, we say the average is 5,000 or 6,000. It's really much less than that because we had a few that were over 12, a couple that were over 12,000. So really the average that we're probably going to continue to find is going to be around the $2,500 to $3,000 mark for our nonprofits, which a lot of that can be attainable through certain funding sources, particularly if you know you're going to get reimbursed for those costs as well.
Okay. And all of the like requirements that were up here that said like the maximum amount of $10,000 being like the one that caught my eye the most, all of those will be shared with people that are applying
Correct. It'll be
up
part of the
front,
application
correct?
packet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I
We put
just wanted
all
to
of
make
our-
sure
We put
that.
everything in the application packet, so there's no questions or clarification that's needed throughout the process. We'll address any questions or clarification, but a lot of times it's referring them to a certain section of the application that tries to clearly identify everything you need to know before you apply.
Okay. And I am just curious because you made me think of this when you're talking about some of the gardens and how they have received funds and then they typically send their produce and what they grow to Grin, supporting another nonprofit. Is there anything in the application that like asks about like working with other nonprofits in the community?
Yeah, so during your project oversight, we encourage you to list any other Gahanna-based nonprofits that would also benefit from the receipt of the funds.
Okay.
What we would like to do is have a network of the nonprofits working together, and over the last few years, we've been able to enhance that.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's great. Just being able to see how the nonprofits support one another and helping to encourage and facilitate that is going to pay off a lot. So I appreciate all your work on this. Thank you.
Mrs. McGregor.
Have we had any organizations default on when we upfronted the money? There's out of the 25 that you funded?
No, we do not have any defaults. We've had some that need a little extra attention for assisting with some of their projects because certain barriers may have come up that they weren't anticipating. It's not a heavy lift on us, but a lot of it is keeping in touch with them, making sure they're hitting their deadlines in that communication piece. But a lot of the projects, in certain spaces we work do have some complexities to it, and it involves a lot of moving pieces, and sometimes the pieces don't line up in the way that is originally fit. So a lot of it is working through, because what we want are any of the projects that are funded, we want them to be successful. There's a reason why they were requested for funding, because there's value to our community. So we, again, encourage and work with them in order to be successful.
That's great, thank you.
So Mr. Renner's hand.
Yeah, Mr. Weibensinger, I just wanted to actually commend you and Joanne. Thank you very, very much to actually putting the time into really thinking through all of the nuances of this. I've been able to actually sit here and listen to all the questions from my colleagues and your responses, and it's very clear that you're coming up in the budgetary process. The administration did present this to us. We countered and said, hey, we definitely want this, but we wanted some tweaks. And you have gone back and actually figured out what those tweaks are. So I commend you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. You said that very eloquently, and so I would just say I echo Mr. Renner's comments. Thank you very much. I know this was a quick turnaround, and I advocated that we continue the program, and we had a robust discussion during budget season, so happy to see this moving forward. I think the program is looking more robust as requested, with more stringent guidelines, or a more substantive framework, I should say. I am at peace with the reimbursement process, with the reimbursement aspect of it, and I saw heads nodding earlier, but I'll just say openly that I think using interest income is a fantastic source. So thank you very much. Any other discussion, questions, comments on this item? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Next up, we have a preliminary discussion of expansion of lodging tax to short-term rentals. For this, I'll turn to Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you. No prepared report or memo or anything like that this evening, but I wanted to bring this up sooner rather than later, and I think it dovetails really well on that last discussion that we just had. So, as many of you know, we had some discussion in the last couple of weeks about Senate Bill 104, which is a bill pending in the General Assembly that would preempt local governments from regulating short-term rentals, except that it would permit and basically direct the expansion of lodging tax to all short-term rentals, hotels, Airbnbs, Verbos, that kind of thing. This is also, I think, broadly been supported by other types of stakeholders in the industry. I think a number of us received packets from Airbnb at the end of last year in which they openly supported the expansion of an excise tax. The Columbus Realtors, I met with them, it was either last year or in 2023, and they expressed their support organizationally for the extension of an excise or a lodging tax to short-term rentals. And the other communities around Ohio have already expanded their lodging tax to these short-term accommodations. So with that, I wanted to just bring this forward to council to make sure that engage the consensus, I'm assuming, that essentially that we're leaving money on the table right now and that we might as well start collecting it, or get the administration, request the administration make progress on implementing the expansion of this lodging tax.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. I'll open this up for any discussion. I see Mr. Schnetzer's hand.
Thank you so much. So I guess one question, one comment. I'll start with the comment first. I just think on the basis of a level playing field, we have hotel partners in this community that, have to comply with the lodging tax. There's this whole other universe of short-term housing that's competing with those hotels that doesn't. It would just seem logical that they all operate on the same playing field. The question that I have is I seem to recall, I don't know if it was late '24, or maybe it was early '25, there was a cliffhanger about the Visit Gahanna having some forthcoming information with regard to short-term rentals. Has that been fleshed out?
So, thank you. That is actually one of the things that I was going to say is that in my discussions with the Commission and Visitors Bureau, Lori has let us know that there's the Ohio Tourism, I forget the acronym, but essentially the Ohio version of the CVB, is trying to get this done as well. So, and they were also at the hearing that we were at opposing Senate Bill 104. So they have been advocating for this as well statewide. And statewide, I'm not sure where things may fall there. But also in our meetings, we have, there is one of the managers of one of the hotels here in Gahanna has mentioned that they have had a lot of cancellations due to bridal parties and such that would book rooms and then they would cancel them because they're going to get Airbnb instead. So they are losing revenue. They're losing stays to Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and then in turn we're losing that tax. So I do think that as long as we are able to collect that lodging tax, we should try to do so. Like you said, it's just putting a short-term rental on the same playing field as a hotel because that's essentially what they are. So I would love to see this, and I know that I can't speak for all of the board members of the CVB, but I am pretty sure that most of them would be very supportive of this as well.
Thank you, Ms. Padova. Madam Mayor, I saw your hand.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to piggyback off of what Councilmember Padova said, so the Ohio Association of Convention and Visitors Bureau, OACVB, it's a long word. So they offered testimony at Senate Bill 104 the day we were down there, obviously testifying in favor of the lodging tax portion, obviously, otherwise objecting to the bill. But not only are they in favor of short-term rentals paying lodging tax, but also sales tax, because right now they wouldn't have to pay sales tax either, which was not part of Senate Bill 104. I do believe that OACVB either was planning to submit or has submitted an alternate bill to Senate Bill 104, but I haven't seen it yet. So I've reached out to OACVB, their executive director, to see kind of where the status is of that. I know, as Councilmember Bauer said, Columbus Realtors would be in favor of it. The Ohio Realtors offered proponent testimony for Senate Bill 104, so they clearly are in favor of the lodging tax as well. And I know that many of the folks who testified, even though in opposition to Senate Bill 104 the day we were there, were in favor of the lodging tax extension. It was just some of the home rule limitations that were proving to be a challenge.
I'll just add anecdotally, I skimmed through some of the proponent testimony that was submitted, and there were short-term rental operators who were in favor of the lodging tax component. So say what you want about the bill. Otherwise, we've had discussion on that as well. So I think Mr. Schnetzer said it best, creates a level playing field, but I didn't want to cut off conversation, though. I just wanted to add my, Mr. Renner.
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I think Councilwoman Bowers actually said it. There's money on the table, so we should go after it. With a proviso, though, I really, and I've spoken from the dais about this before, I really am opposed and would like to actually see regulation about Airbnbs, Verbos, and all that kind of stuff. We're actually changing the look and feel of our communities. When in cities, especially us, we go through great pains to zone appropriately where housing, small family housing is going to be. And then the question becomes, if we give homeowners the right to actually do this, what else are we going to actually do? Split up property taxes, and so property owners can actually spend their property taxes however they want? I'm just throwing this out there, and it's rhetorical because I'm not looking for any answers, but this scares me, and that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Mr. Renner, and absent seeing, Mrs. McGregor.
Well, I know that a lady I met, she has I don't know if it's an Airbnb or Verbo on her street, but it's like 7 or 8 construction workers, and they're in the neighborhood, they're parking all over. It's on a small cul-de-sac, so there's not room for all each one of them has a pickup truck. They're parking off the pavement, and it's just not, it's not like there's somebody, an owner there who oversees it. It's an empty house, and they come, and that's what's kind of changing. And I don't know how we would regulate that, but that's an issue.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. McGregor. And I know, so I believe we've all received similar constituent communications or met with residents. And I'll just say for the formulation of this agenda, we really just wanted to have a high-level conversation of where we were on the lodging tax and in the hope of working with the administration to see something possibly move forward. But I do have on my notes a question of, would council like to have a further discussion of what other possible regulatory tools we may have in regards to short-term rentals? You know, SB 104 would prohibit some of those. But I know there's a whole list of tools that even Airbnb proposed in their packet that they mailed us. I know, Ms. Bowers, you had some additional comments on this.
Yeah, thank you. And just by way of a little bit of background for my colleagues, so yes, thank you, Mrs. McGregor and Mr. Renner. I think that I certainly have an appetite to bring forward proposals. There were extensive conversations among myself, the city attorney, the administration, Mr. Van Meter, and some of our other council staff that supported significant research last year with regard to short-term rental regulation. I think it's probably getting close to time, I think, for us to bring it forward to the dais. We were hoping that city attorney's office and planning department, we're going to fine-tune some of the discussion because we are constrained not only by what might happen with the General Assembly, but we're also constrained by case law and across the U.S., not just here in Ohio. So I think that we were looking for a synthesis on what can we do, what do we think would possibly result in lawsuit. There are some Central Ohio communities who have outright banned short-term rentals, which I think is not legally defensible, but that would probably be an extreme position for us to take. So I just wanted to offer that background, that there's been a significant amount of research that's been compiled. Charlie Schneider, our MORPC intern last year, put together a significant amount of work on the menu of options and types of legislation that have been introduced across the country and across the state, as well as starting to compile and identify properties here in Gahanna that are being used for this purpose. So I wanted to just share that with you all, and certainly look forward to future discussion on this item as well. I have some trepidation that I don't want to waste people's time if Senate Bill 104 gets passed, though.
I would just, thank you, Ms. Bowers. I would just say, I sort of, in my head, in terms of planning how we could have a discussion in the future on this, sort of recalled our conversation when we created the tobacco retail licensure program. There was pending litigation elsewhere in the state. There was pending legislation as well in the preemption space. For my druthers, I know the meeting on the 14th is already pretty packed, but if we could have a more robust discussion on what our regulatory options are, maybe on the 28th, and then see what the will of council is at that time in terms of crafting legislation, because I don't want to create draft legislation and then have it keep coming back to remove this thing or add this thing. I'd rather have that conversation on the front end so that we can get a cohesive piece of legislation and perhaps see what movement there is at the State House.
That said, though, we could still maybe work to advance the lodging tax.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Schnetzer.
That'd be my preference, is that to the extent that there's no obstacle at the state level for the lodging tax, that we pursue that more near term.
Yes.
And perhaps to be respectful of really everybody's time, city attorney especially, perhaps we wait to see what the outcome of that SB 104 is before moving forward with any regulatory discussion or anything like that, which I'm in favor of, but I just want to be mindful of everybody's time if that ultimately does end up getting passed, and to what does the landscape look like post that bill? Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
All right, perfect.
Except it could just get stuck in committee and we don't know when it's going to come out or if it's going to get a vote because they just started this term. So it could be another 12 plus 9 months. So it could be another 21 months before we know if SB 104 progresses before the end of their term. So I think that I hear you and I tend to agree with you, but I think that they did this the last General Assembly cycle too. In 135, there was another bill that was pending too that was proposing to preempt us, so we didn't really do anything, and now here we are again in kind of the same position.
Okay, sorry, I was under the
No,
impression
no,
this
it's
was
okay.
something that was going to happen like relatively soon.
We could, we're monitor, I think that a lot of us are watching this bill, but it would, I think that we do have to strike kind of we have to do something on this, otherwise we're just going to keep doing nothing.
Totally, yeah. I just didn't want to send somebody down a rabbit hole and then this thing gets passed in like 6 weeks and then it's all for nothing, right? So that's all I'm trying to guard against.
But I agree. I think in the immediate term, the sooner that we can move forward with lodging tax, the better off for the community.
Anything else on the lodging tax aspect? Otherwise, I'll tentatively set the 28th as,
Come back.
as additional conversation. Okay. All right, thank you. We are getting there, folks. Next up, we have items from the Department of Finance. Director, you could have just sat there the whole time.
All right. First item that I have is a request for a resolution reaffirming myself as the RETA Maine delegate, and then assigning Crystal Jolly as the alternate delegate to replace Chris Wright, who recently retired. So as a member of RETA, we get representation on the Regional Council of Governments, and it's to be selected by the mayor and then with approval from council. So just requesting the resolution to name me as the main and Crystal Jolly as the delegate or alternate.
All right, thank you, Director. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, on for consent on the 7th. All right, thank you. Next item, please, Director.
So next item is we realized that there was a capital improvement project that was approved for the Mayor's Court kiosk for the new municipal building. It was just missed as part of the appropriations, so we already have the project. It was approved by the Capital Advisory Committee, so just asking for those appropriations to be added. So an ordinance for supplemental appropriations to get the appropriations for that project included.
All right, thank you, Director. Any discussion of this item? All right, seeing none, on for first and then consent on the 21st. All right, thank you very much, Director. Anything else for the Committee of the Whole? All right, seeing nothing further, I will adjourn. We'll adjourn Committee of the Whole and turn things over to Chairman Renner for Finance.
Okay, I would like to go ahead and call to order our Finance Committee. And first up, Ms. Joanne. I guess I was a little bit premature. I thought you were ready.
All right, so what I have for you tonight is the 2024 year-end report. Same agenda as we normally have, discuss the year-end results for general funds, special revenue funds, and capital improvement fund. Brief summary on the capital improvement plan, what our income tax trends have been through the end of the year, how our investments are setting, and then a conclusion based on those year-end results. So starting with general fund year-end revenue, very similar to the previous quarters, trending higher than expected except for other revenue. 11% increase over 2023. And income taxes as expected. So very similar to Q3 results, we have our property tax higher than expected based on the sexennial appraisal. We're seeing that investment income still come in higher than anticipated, again, as that interest rate environment is not changing, and then our income tax coming in where we anticipated. Any questions on general fund revenue? All right, we'll move on to year-end expenditures. So again, very similar to the previous quarters, we're at 73%. When encumbrances are included, we're at about 90% or 91%. Seeing salaries and benefits come in at about 90. We still have some vacant positions, but seeing that increase over 2023 as expected. We had increases in salaries and benefits. Contract services at about 70% and about 27% higher than last year. And that's due to those same items that we had previously discussed, the real estate taxes. We had a one-time assessment for changing carriers for our liability and cyber and criminal insurance coverage. And then materials and benefits coming in higher than last year. Just we've had increased activities for parks and recreation, IT operations, and just general materials and supplies. Questions on expenditures?
Yeah, I do. Joanne, can you expand a little bit on why 73% is coming in at the end of the year? I definitely expected 85 like previous years or 90%. Why 73?
Well, I always turn to the encumbrance number. So a lot of items that we may have purchased, or there might be things that are on a quarterly basis, potentially don't come in for payment until the first quarter of 2025. So that's why I always reference where we're at when we include those encumbrances, because our items that we have sitting in encumbrance that we have obligated, but those invoices haven't come in. And a big part of this one for the year end of 2024 is that capital outlay number related to the facilities, right? We set aside $7 million. We've used $1.7 million, and we'll keep using those funds through 2025 and 2026. That was more securing those funds for that multi-year contract.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any others? Next, we have the general fund impact. Seeing those transfers out, again, that's related to debt service requirements and transfers to our payouts for those who separate from the city. We added back about $6.5 million in fund balance, bringing us to $42 million. Of that, about 7.9 is reserved for encumbrance. A big portion of that is for the facility. And then we have 8.45 in emergency reserve, leaving us with about 25.7 in unreserved fund balance. That's equivalent to about 11 months of operations, which is higher than the 2-month minimum. Any questions? Great. Okay, so this is aligning the 3 special revenue funds and how they performed with the budget. Very similar for all of them, seeing coming in higher than anticipated on the revenue side, a little bit lower on the expense side. For public safety, you're about where you'd want to be at that high 90%. And then for the public service fund, seeing there's that low percentage, again, same as we discussed in the previous quarters, there were a number of initiatives that they just couldn't get to in 2024.
I missed risked asking a question about the general fund balance.
Sure,
I
I can go up.
apologize. I had one lined up and then I forgot to ask it. I apologize, Joanne, but just to clarify, the 8.45 million for reserve for emergency, is that in addition to the 2 months set by policy, or is that equivalent to?
They're separate.
They are
So,
separate,
yeah,
okay.
so the emergency reserve is set at 25% of your anticipated expenditures for the year, and that's based on a risk matrix that we use. The 2-month minimum of unreserved fund balance was part of the new policy that came forward that changed that from just an emergency reserve policy to an overall general fund balance policy that said, it's clear and we all understand that we could use that unreserved fund balance. It's part of our resources to use for appropriations each year, but we will never let that go below 2 months. So we kind of have two reserves. We have our emergency reserve, and then we have another little reserve that kind of sets that says, we understand we could use our unreserved fund balance, but we're never going to let it go below 2 months of operations.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yeah, please,
Just
Mr.
just
Snetzer.
add one thing to that.
Sure.
So I remember when we went through the matrix, the GFOA worksheet and all that stuff to get to the 25%. I think the additional 2-month operating layer, that was at the advice of our municipal advisor, was it not, to help us kind of like maintain our credit rating at a certain level, like as sort of good
No,
governance?
that was just what I brought forward as part of the change in policy as a comfort level that we would never completely eliminate our unreserved fund balance. Because I think that, especially before issue 12, right, that was a main concern. We just kept on spending it because we didn't have any capital resources. So there was always this concern that at some point it was going to be gone. So it was just a comfort level that we would never completely eliminate that unreserved fund balance.
Okay. No disrespect to Mr. Cooper. I thought that was where
Yeah.
it came from. If you're the source, then credit to you.
Yep. Okay, so now looking at those 3 special revenue funds and how they compared to 2023. Those reductions in income tax revenue that you're seeing, same as we discussed previously, there's a change in allocation. Every year we look at what the operations of those 3 funds are going to be and what the income tax resources are going to be, plus the additional revenue they're bringing in to determine how much of that 25% do they need for their operations. So that was a change in allocation. That's why you're seeing those differences compared to 2023. For the expenditures, seeing that increase in the public safety fund, again, we added that 4th SRO officer, so that was expected. In Parks and Recreation, we were expecting that increase. They had hired some additional full-time, and they increased their seasonal pools. They've been doing wonderful. Their activities have been very popular and been producing great resources, as you can see, almost bringing in $1.4 million in charges for services. So that was another anticipated increase that we were expecting. On the public service side, which represents our engineering department, seeing that 12% increase, but just because they were even less staffed in 2023 to 2024. So they haven't added anything additional. It's just they're in better shape, staff-wise, in 2024 than they were in 2023. Any questions on how those compared to 2023?
Ms. Bowers?
Public service fund expenditures for 2024, how does that compare to 2023?
So we're seeing a 6% decrease. So again, 2023, they were not staffed at an optimal level. So seeing now in 2024, even though they're not fully staffed, they're better. So they had to rely a lot on contract services in 2023 since they had so little staff in 2023. So now we're kind of seeing that flip, right? They have more staff, so now they're relying less on contract services, if that makes sense.
But their overall expenditure of planned.
Well, planned is the previous slide. So they're at 39% of plan because they did have some items identified that were one-time initiatives that were going to be in contract services that they did not get to in 2024.
And what about in 2023? Did you have a percent of planned or no?
No, so what
Okay.
you're seeing there is their percent difference compared to actuals in 2023.
Okay. Is there a plan in 2025 to catch up on any of those items that were not picked up in 2024?
I believe so. Tom's already gone. But yes, they have some things identified in their 2025 budget. So now looking at the capital improvement fund, seeing similar results, previous quarters, and across the city in general, seeing those revenues outproduce estimates. And then expenditures, while we only expended 28%, again, looking at the encumbrances is an important part with this one because a lot of these are multi-year projects. So when you take encumbrances into account, we're at 89% of the plan. And then at the end of the year, we have about $17.2 million of unreserved dollars sitting in the capital improvement fund. Any questions on the capital improvement fund? And these are just for informational purposes and to see if there are any questions. These are within the report. Just giving a quick summary of the capital improvement plan. Through the end of the year, we spent about $33.1 million and had about $57.6 million encumbered or sitting on purchase orders. A big majority of that you'll see right there on the chart on the left, about halfway down is the facility. That's making up the majority of that encumbered amount. Any questions on any of the projects and where they stood at the end of the year?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Question, if I may. Thank you. Looks like there's a couple entries on here where there was nothing encumbered, but there were actual expenditures.
Those
Would
are
that be like
probably done.
grants or something, or, sorry?
No, those are probably projects that are done. You're probably just seeing the last of the
Gotcha.
expenses and then the related purchase orders were closed out.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's what I had.
And then the next couple slides are just kind of the same information, just in a different format. So this is by fund and category. So you can kind of see within those funds where the main areas were for expenses and encumbrances. And if there aren't any questions on projects, I'll go ahead and flip over to income tax. Questions? Okay. So income tax trending just as we anticipated for 2024. We knew we'd see that increase in withholdings based on economic growth. We knew that we'd see in the general fund that dive in the individual income tax. We had that anomaly in 2023. We're not seeing that reoccur. And then for the net profit, we knew that that would normalize, and then that would start tracking increases along with withholding. We had a slight bump in the special revenue in the capital improvement fund, that 1%. But looking at the general fund as kind of how we're tracking with that 1.5%, seeing that net profit starting to normalize as we expected. Any questions on income tax? So investments, again, we're seeing that high interest rate environment, still doing well in our portfolio. Star Ohio was at about 4. Star Ohio is at 4.7%, and our overall portfolio, that's all of our other investments, are at about 4%. Since the last interest rate cuts in November and December, each of those were 25 basis points each. Since then, the meetings have not indicated any further cuts in the near future, kind of seeing that inflation do a little bit of a creep, going from 2.4% to about 2.9% by the end of the year, so they're kind of letting everything ride. There is still confidence that that 2% will be reached, but until things start tracking back in that direction, I don't think there's going to be any movements on the rates. So again, seeing that inflation come up a little bit, however, it's anticipated that we're still going to hit that 2% mark, still expecting economic growth, and then what that future impact will be on our resources and the need for services. And again, continuing our efforts with the strategic plan, our Gahanna, and the economic development plan will kind of lay that groundwork to how we kind of address our shrinking ability to develop and how we handle additional needs of our resources. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a litany. Sorry? I have a litany of them, whenever's appropriate.
Mr. Snetzer, go for it.
Sure. So, well, I mean, it's kind of starting back at the beginning, so bear with me. I promise it goes somewhere. So I printed out the document, and I was highlighting it when I had some time at work and put some notes in the margin. So bear with me as I kind of go through my own notes here. In a nutshell, general fund revenue was up 11% year over year. So it's literally all the revenue sources, and general fund expenditures up 17% year over year. On the revenue side, relative to estimates, kudos to you. I went back and looked at the budget minutes from 2023, and you had estimated 4%. Literally hit it like right on the screws on the income tax. So great job there. Real estate tax outperformed estimates by 20%, right? Mm-hmm. And then the big one being investment and interest income outperformed by 120%. I wanted to, I guess, maybe touch on that a little bit. Perhaps the one thing that we didn't have visibility in the budget season 2023 was the bond issuance. And later on in your report, you talk about that being invested. Is it safe to say that's where the bulk of the outperformance is stemming from? So absent, no?
So you'll see that in the capital improvement fund. So since those are related to a capital project, the interest earned on those bond proceeds is going back into the capital improvement fund.
Okay.
So that 1.7 million is what we've received on the bond proceeds.
So that's page 28, the bottom paragraph. It says investment earnings are 220% of plan for 24 compared to 23 investment earnings of 1.3 million. And then it goes on to say bond proceeds have been placed in a separate Star Ohio account, and interest earned through the year end would be 1.7 million. Mm-hmm. So even absent those bond proceeds, we would still be outperforming on the.
Yes.
Okay.
And,
good news.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. So I have Red Tree do the projection for me. Okay. And I caught it in 2025, but in 2024 for the budget, I missed including Star Ohio. So when they said, here's your projection for your interest revenue, I assume that was for our entire portfolio, including Star Ohio. We clarified that they're only looking at the part that they're managing. So that's why it's kind of off the mark there. It was kind of, I use them, here's our portfolio, what do you think it's going to do based on what you're seeing with the feds and how they're handling things. They come back with a projection. I just assumed that Star Ohio was included in there, and it was not.
Well, I mean, better to underestimate than overestimate, right?
Right.
So it's a good surprise. On that topic, you had mentioned that Star Ohio's current yield is somewhere around 4.7, and then I just want to make sure I heard you overall, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you say the balance that Red Tree's managing is 4%, or the overall portfolio is around 4%?
Just the piece that Red Tree is
Okay.
managing is at 4%.
Okay. So a blended rate of, we'll call it 4.3, 4.4, somewhere around there?
Yeah, I'd say that's
Okay.
about right.
All Perfect. And Mr. Chair, if I may, one more thing.
Please.
There's a section where you talk about general fund expenditures. This is on page 2 of the report. There's a bullet that says, where you talk about the real estate tax payments, how we're still waiting, we're still paying the real estate taxes on.
No longer paying, so we had one payment that was made, or well, actually, it was, we did have to make both payments in 2024, where they were waiting for the determination.
Okay.
It was approved, so we don't have that payment in 2025, but what we're waiting for is the refund
Okay.
to come back. We've requested it, but it hasn't come back into our coffers just yet.
Perfect. So here's the question relating to that. There's this bullet that says the general fund expenditures have increased by 17% or 4.4 million, with the largest increases coming from capital outlay for construction of the new municipal building and contract services. There's then a follow-on bullet point that talks about the taxes. Of that, I guess I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this question. So we have 4.4 million. How much of that is the taxes that'll come back to us? Do you happen to know that number?
Not off the top of my head, but I can get back to you.
I mean, is it a
It's
million?
over, no, it's like oh gosh, I don't even want to estimate at this point because I have so many numbers going through my head. Have I told you
Fair
the
enough.
auditors are on site?
Okay.
So, yeah, so I will go back. It'll take me like 2 seconds to get it
Okay.
once I get back in my office.
And that
So
would
I'll
be-
send it to everybody tomorrow.
Perfect.
Mr.
Thank you.
Weaver's getting it for us right now.
That's all for me. Thank you.
That's it?
Yes. You guys are off the hook.
I overpromise.
No.
Are you getting close?
Yeah, looks like it was about 361,000 for the year.
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Let me go back to the agenda. I think that was the only item on our agenda, correct?
Yes.
Yep. All right. We're adjourned.